Inner stillness is a kind of power that makes you untouchable. No one can manipulate your emotions. No one can drag you into battles that aren't worth fighting. It's not passive silence. It's the conscious choice of a woman who no longer needs to speak up just to prove her worth. In a world that glorifies quick reactions, loud opinions, and bold declarations, a wise woman steps back, not out of fear, but because she has nothing to prove. She knows her value isn't found in hurried responses or endless debates. Her presence alone commands respect, not through volume, but through energy. A quiet energy that shifts the atmosphere without saying a word. She doesn't seek attention. She draws it through her calm. Within her there is no chaos, no need to react to win, no habit of using words as weapons. That doesn't make her weak, it makes her untouchable. A woman like that doesn't need to be understood through explanation. She knows the truth doesn't need to be shouted. She doesn't join every conversation, answer every accusation, or react to every trigger. Because she understands one thing: every fight that pulls her away from peace is a trap set by the ego. And she's no longer willing to trade her awareness for a fleeting moment of victory. Her inner world is not an open field for every passing emotion. It has gates, boundaries, and discernment. Not everyone gets in. Not everything gets to stay. She once let others' opinions roam freely in her mind and paid for it with emotional exhaustion. She used to spend all her energy defending herself, explaining, correcting, proving until she burned out over things that never really mattered. Now, she chooses silence. Not to endure, but to preserve her power for what truly matters. Inner stillness isn't something you're born with. It's forged. From all the times you reacted too fast and regretted it. From conflicts that were never worth it. From relationships that crumbled because no one knew when to pause. And in the end, she learned not reacting doesn't mean losing. It means mastering herself. She doesn't avoid. She observes. When insulted, she doesn't retaliate. When misjudged, she doesn't rush to correct. She watches, she steps back. She lets time reveal the truth. Wisdom doesn't always come through sharp replies, but through the ability to stay grounded in the storm. The world doesn't need to know what she's thinking. What matters is that she knows exactly what she's doing. Stillness is not emptiness. It's the fullness of awareness. And when she protects that inner space, nothing outside has the power to shake her. A smart woman doesn't need to win every argument. She wins in how she lives. No one taught her this. It was brokenness, exhaustion, and missteps that armed her with the quietest weapon, the ability to stand still without being swept away. Not everyone who is silent is at peace. Some wear a quiet face while their mind is a noisy marketplace filled with imaginary arguments, unsaid retorts, and unhealed wounds. The truth is, most people don't know how to sit still with themselves. They fear silence. They fear being misunderstood. They fear that staying quiet makes them look weak. But a wise woman no longer moves from fear. She understands guarding her mental space is the first step to reclaiming the sovereignty of her life. She doesn't respond to every comment, defend every judgment, or rush to explain when misread. Not because she's unaware, but because she chooses not to waste energy on what's undeserving. Some words are better left to the wind. Some battles should never be fought. Every time you react, you give someone else the remote control to your mind. She knows that, and she keeps her most sacred power, emotional self-command. Her mind is no longer an open field where every opinion, drama, or invitation can freely come and go. It's become a private sanctuary, protected by boundaries and intention. Not every conversation gets to enter. Not every emotional trigger is allowed to linger. She filters everything through one sharp lens. Does this serve my peace? If the answer is no, she discards it unapologetically, without explanation. The peace she holds today wasn't given to her. It was earned through hundreds of exhausting arguments that led nowhere, through emotional whirlwinds triggered by others, through confusing reaction with responsibility. After all that, she now retreats not from weakness, but from wisdom. Not out of coldness, but out of clarity. She understands the more you react, the more control you hand over. The calmer you remain, the harder you are to reach. In neuroscience, there's a concept called cognitive load, the mental burden of too much noise. When your mind is flooded with conflict, information, or negativity, your logic breaks down. you lose self-control. You lose empathy. In other words, the more your mental space is occupied by the unnecessary, the further you drift from your true self. She has lived this truth, and now she sets firm boundaries with others and herself. She doesn't avoid people. She avoids distraction. She doesn't isolate from the world. She simply doesn't allow its chaos to infiltrate her inner world. She's intentional with every conversation, every headline, every connection, because she knows emotional quality isn't defined by what happens to you, but by what you allow to exist in your mind. And so non-reaction becomes an art, not passive, but intentional. When someone says something hurtful, she doesn't rush to correct because she understands hurt people often hurt others. When a relationship turns toxic, she doesn't beg it to heal. She walks away knowing she won't purify herself just to keep someone unwilling to change. When someone uses silence or vague words to manipulate her, she doesn't chase because she knows truth reveals itself when you're quiet enough to see clearly. Some call it cold. She calls it wisdom, the wisdom of not letting others write the script of her emotions. She can smile, look someone in the eye, and walk away without a single bitter word, without carrying a drop of resentment home, because she knows her energy is sacred. It's not to be spent on the petty. Non-reaction is not numbness. It's full awareness without letting emotion take the wheel. She sees clearly, she feels deeply, but she chooses silence not to endure, but to preserve the clarity of her mind, because when the mind is protected, decisions are clean. And a woman with a steady mind is not easily swayed, not easily shaken, and never easily manipulated. Reaction is instinct. Response is mastery. Reactions are immediate, triggered the moment a wound is touched, but response requires a pause, a brief space, yet powerful enough to determine whether you repeat old patterns or choose a new path. A wise woman doesn't react on autopilot. She pauses. Just a few seconds, but enough to turn tension into clarity. When others attack, she doesn't snap back. When insulted, she doesn't fire back with hurt. She pauses. Even when anger rises, even when her heart stings, she chooses that breath, not letting others steer her emotions, not letting a single moment define her character. That pause is the boundary between someone who knows who she is and someone who loses herself to the heat of the moment. She doesn't pause to suppress. She pauses to see, to truly understand what's unfolding. Behind a careless comment might be a hurting soul. Behind rude behavior might be someone who's lost their way. And behind her own wave of emotion may lie an old wound, still healing. That pause isn't weakness, it's strength, refined. People often think intelligence is about saying the sharpest thing at the perfect moment, but true intelligence is knowing when not to speak, when not to react, when to step back and protect your grace. In that sacred pause, she hears not just the words of others, but the voice of her own heart. She sees not just the behavior, but the intention. She faces not just the person in front of her, but the truth within herself. Neuroscience confirms just 90 seconds of stillness after being triggered allows the brain's emotional center to quiet down and activates the rational part, the seat of wise decision-making, self-control, and empathy. In other words, a little patience now can save hours of regret later. And she knows this. She doesn't delay because she's afraid to speak. She waits because she values wisdom over momentary satisfaction. She chooses her words like she chooses her weapons carefully. Not to wound, not to win, but to clarify, to heal, to connect. And when her emotions are still murky, she chooses silence. Because she knows words born from anger are rarely the right ones. Her silence isn't cold, it's intentional. A delay until she's calm enough not to destroy something precious with one careless moment. A woman like that, when she speaks, people listen. Because every word carries weight. Every sentence is chosen, not because she says much, but because she speaks with timing. She doesn't need to win every argument. She wants to win in the way she lives. She doesn't seek to break others with her words. She seeks to not be broken by her emotions. She's made mistakes. She's reacted poorly. She said things she later regretted. But those moments taught her something invaluable. Pausing isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. And with every pause, she grants herself a new chance to respond, not from pain, but from maturity. In love, she doesn't rush to blame. In work, she doesn't rush to point fingers. In relationships, she doesn't rush to judge. She observes, she feels, and then she responds from a place of grounded energy that's hard to define but impossible to ignore. That's why people think twice before speaking to her, before acting around her, because they know she won't be dragged in. She leads the energy. She's not a puppet of circumstance. And that is the power of the pause, a strength no one can hand you. It's self-forged, a kind of silence that doesn't make her weaker. It makes her unshakable. Some women have been too soft and got used. Others have been too hard and hurt the ones they love. They learned a costly lesson. Softness at the wrong time becomes surrender, and hardness in the wrong place becomes cruelty. A wise woman doesn't live at either extreme. She trains herself to know when to be water, gentle, adaptable, compassionate, and when to be steel sharp, firm, and unshakable. She no longer confuses forgiveness with self-harm. She no longer believes that silence is always maturity, or that tolerance is the only way to keep someone close. She once bent over backwards, lowered her standards, hid her true feelings, all for the sake of a love that was never certain. And in doing so, she lost herself in unconditional softness. But she woke up. Softness without boundaries invites disrespect, and toughness without warmth builds walls too high to climb. Her softness today isn't surrender, it's wisdom. She knows how to bend without breaking, to understand before judging, to stay quiet so others can hear themselves. But if someone takes that compassion for granted, crosses her boundaries, or expects her to sacrifice herself just to maintain the relationship, she won't hesitate to turn sharp, not to retaliate, but to protect her dignity. She used to forgive too easily, overlook too much, accept the same excuses on repeat. She used to think love meant patience, endurance, carrying both her pain and theirs, believing love could heal what someone else refused to grow through. But now she knows love is not prolonged suffering. No one should bear the emotional responsibility of another. She chooses to love with clarity, with strong boundaries, with the quiet truth. I am willing to give, but I will not trade myself away. When disrespected, she doesn't scream. She steps back in silence. When taken advantage of, she doesn't expose or humiliate. She simply disappears. She understands that the greatest power isn't found in anger. It's in no longer giving someone access to the deepest parts of you. Her steel doesn't erase her warmth. It simply helps her discern who deserves her softness and who only gets to see the edge. In every situation, she doesn't react from emotion. She responds from awareness. When she sees pain, she soothes. When she senses manipulation, she withdraws. When someone uses silence to control, she doesn't panic. She observes. And when she catches herself weakening out of fear of loss, she reminds herself a grown woman never holds on to someone by letting go of herself. She's not afraid to cry. She's not ashamed to be vulnerable. She softens when it matters, cries when it hurts, forgives when she understands. But that doesn't make her naive. No one gets to repeat the same mistake over and over and expect the same open arms. She loves with trust, but sustains it with wisdom. And within that love, the man beside her feels safe, not because she's fragile, but because she's clear. Psychology calls it emotional flexibility, the ability to move between emotional states without getting stuck. She is not defined by anger, sadness, loneliness, or infatuation. She feels them all, but is ruled by none. And that very flexibility makes her hard to manipulate, hard to shake, hard to fool. She doesn't need to act tough to be strong. She doesn't need to be weak to be loved. She stands between extremes, strong as steel, soft as water. When someone is kind, they'll feel her warmth. When someone crosses the line, they'll meet an unbreakable wall. She doesn't try to please, she lives in truth. And that makes her both hard to hold and impossible not to respect. A wise woman doesn't rush to speak, she observes. While others scramble to be seen, to be right, to be heard, she steps back, not out of shyness, but clarity. It's not that she has nothing to say, but that she chooses to fully understand before responding. In a world loud with the need to prove, she chooses silence to see more clearly. Observation isn't just about using the eyes, it's a fusion of intuition, sensitivity, and the ability to read what lives behind the words. She listens to the words, but she's attuned to the tone. She watches facial expressions, glances, posture, and pauses between sentences. She doesn't jump to conclusions or judge by appearances, because she knows people don't always show what they truly feel. She observes because she understands. Some truths only reveal themselves to those who are still enough to see. When someone laughs too loudly, she notices the fatigue in their eyes. When someone stays silent too long, she doesn't pressure, she senses the emptiness behind it. When someone speaks of success, she hears not just the victories, but the loneliness hidden between lines. She sees what others overlook. She hears what others don't say. And most importantly, she observes herself. She notices how she shifts when she's tired, how she reacts when hurt, how her heart trembles in front of someone who stirs her soul, not to judge, but to adjust, because she knows the lack of control never starts outside, it begins within. She's not swayed by appearances, not easily fooled by pretty promises. She watches actions, she notices how someone treats the waiter, how they speak of their ex, how they react to rejection, what others call trivial. She sees as character maps. She doesn't need to interrogate, doesn't need to control, just observe long enough, the truth always shows itself. But her observation isn't to condemn. She's not collecting evidence to accuse. She watches with presence, unattached, unguarded. That's why people feel free around her, free to be themselves, free from performance, free from the fear of being misunderstood. And in that space, their true selves begin to emerge. People see her silence and mistake it for distance. But her quiet is doing the work, reading the room, sensing energy, tuning into what's real instead of reacting to what's loud. She doesn't need to chase truth. She trusts that what she needs to know will come as long as she stays present, observant, and patient. In relationships, she isn't the loudest voice, but she's the one who makes others feel heard. Not through words, but through a non-judgmental gaze, through undivided attention. Some people have a hard time opening up, but with her, they slowly unfold because they feel she's not trying to dig just to be there with them. She's been hurt before by things she didn't see early on. She once ignored red flags, choosing instead to believe in what was beautiful. But those lessons didn't turn her bitter. They made her wiser. Now, she doesn't need to control, but she also doesn't ignore. She sees enough to love rightly. She understands enough to choose wisely. She stays silent, not out of detachment, but to notice even what's being hidden. And through that deep observation, she's no longer easily wounded by surprises. She's not easily misled, not quick to misplace her trust, not because she's cynical, but because she's clear. She doesn't fight to be heard, because her silence already reveals more truth than any words could. It's not a skill, it's wisdom, sharpened by life, by pain, by returning home to herself. A woman like that, when she enters a space, people feel at ease. Not because she's safe, but because she can see chaos and still hold her calm. A wise woman doesn't just observe to understand, she observes to act. Not to collect data, but to consciously choose how she wants to live. She doesn't move through life by reflex, she moves by design. Not to impress others, but to feel fully present in every moment. After she sees enough, she begins to create. She creates space, she creates time, she creates rhythm all by intention. Her days aren't shaped by others' schedules, society's expectations, or unconscious habits. She curates a pace of life that feels like her own. Not flashy, but full. Not grand, but meaningful. While others are swept up in the constant current of consumption, news, social media, drama, empty advice, she pauses. She knows the more you consume, the less room you leave for creation. The louder the outside noise, the harder it is to hear your inner voice. So she chooses to live simply in information, so she can live richly in presence. She doesn't wait for inspiration. She initiates it by beginning. A sentence written, a page read, a space tidied, a moment of gratitude jotted down. She understands. Creativity doesn't have to become a masterpiece. Sometimes it's just a meal cooked with love, a morning spent away from screens, a corner of the home rearranged to bring the mind back into order. She creates moments. She doesn't wait for them to come. She brings calm into chaos. lights a candle in her loneliness, names her emotions before they swell. For her, creativity isn't talent, it's a way of being, a daily reminder that I have the power to choose how I respond, but more than that, I have the power to shape the experience I want to live. She once lived on someone else's schedule, once waited for others to bring her joy, once sought emotional fullness through someone else's presence. But then she realized waiting for someone to make you feel whole is like standing in the rain, hoping someone else will bring you an umbrella. So she stopped waiting and she began creating. She journals to meet herself. She draws not to display, but to connect with her softness. She walks alone to listen to the thoughts that haven't yet found words. No one sees these things. No one claps for them. But they restore her, they heal her, they hold her steady in times of change. When hurt, she doesn't run to unload. She seeks silence to rebuild. When a relationship ends, she doesn't rush to replace it. She fills the gap with care for herself. She plants a small tree, buys a book, spends a Saturday morning brewing tea and doing nothing. And through those quiet acts, she reminds herself, I still have worth, even when I no longer belong to anyone. For her, creation is a silent declaration. I don't just exist, I live. I don't float through life. I place my hands on the wheel. I may not avoid every storm, but I still choose the direction. I don't move by shoulds, I move by wants. And in every small intentional act, she returns to her greatest power, the power to own her life. She doesn't consume to fill a void. She creates to connect with herself, with life, with every breath. And in that self-driven living, she's no longer dependent on validation. She doesn't need anyone to give her a reason to live beautifully. She gives it to herself. And when a woman lives this way, she doesn't have to impress. She becomes unforgettable. The more a woman matures, the less she explains. Not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. Anything that needs constant justification is often something she's still unsure of herself. Real boundaries are not spoken, they're lived. She doesn't need to raise her voice to protect herself. She simply stops showing up where she no longer belongs. Boundaries aren't walls. They're mirrors reflecting how much she respects herself and teaching others how to treat her. When someone texts at the wrong hour, she doesn't reply. When someone only shows up when they need something, she stops initiating. When someone crosses a line knowingly, she doesn't argue, she withdraws silently but with complete clarity. She once believed that maintaining relationships meant tolerating, explaining, and trying just a bit harder. But then she realized the more she fought to keep relationships that lacked respect, the more she lost herself. Some people don't need more of your effort, they need you to abandon yourself. And that's a price she no longer pays. She doesn't set boundaries to punish anyone. She sets them to protect what's left of her softness after too many times being overlooked. It's not rigidity, it's self-respect. And a woman who respects herself doesn't justify. She lets her actions speak. When she pulls back her energy, when she stops entertaining lazy returns, when she no longer reacts to emotional games, people realize she's not the same version of herself they once could sway. She used to give second chances freely, not because they were earned, but because she hoped people would finally understand. But eventually, she stopped waiting for others to change. She began changing herself. Instead of repeating reminders, she reset her limits. Instead of re-explaining what was already clear, she stopped talking. And that silence carried a message. Losing her wasn't just a phase. It was final. Society often labels women with strong boundaries as cold, selfish, or distant, but they don't see the nights she cried in silence from being taken for granted. The moments she agonized over forgiving one more time or walking away forever. The time she wondered if holding on to her self-worth would mean walking alone for the rest of her life. Her strength wasn't born in a day. It was forged from pain she refuses to relive. She knows now. People have the right to leave her life, and she has the right not to stop them. Boundaries aren't about pushing others away. They're about revealing who's willing to stay with honesty. She no longer lowers herself to keep anyone around. She no longer uses her patience to nurture what's already rotting. Those who are sincere will respect her lines. Those who aren't will see them as resistance. And she no longer bends herself to fit into anyone's comfort zone. Boundaries aren't just for others, they're for herself too. She won't stay where she's disrespected. She won't love someone more than she loves herself. She won't excuse the habit of self-betrayal. She won't dig up the past just to torment her present. She guards her mind like a sacred temple. Who enters, who stays, who leaves, all must pass through discernment. A woman who honors her boundaries knows exactly how much energy she has and where it's worth offering. She doesn't pour herself out just to be accepted. She doesn't fill others' emptiness with her own. She lives full, so she doesn't cling. She stands steady, so she doesn't explain. And that's what makes her irreplaceable to those who truly see her worth. Self-respect is not a concept. It's a practice. It lives in the quiet, repeated actions, the kind no one sees, no one applauds, yet they shape a presence that cannot be dismissed. A wise woman doesn't wait for the world to validate her worth. She builds it day by day through rituals only. She knows small, steady, quiet, but they are the strongest architecture of her dignity. She doesn't wake up to her phone. She begins her day with presence, a deep breath, a glass of warm water, a page in her journal, a still moment with the morning sun. No one asks her to do this, but she chooses to, because she knows how you begin your day reflects how you treat yourself. She doesn't dress well to impress. She dresses well because she honors her body. She doesn't eat just to feel full. She eats to nourish. She doesn't clean her space just to be tidy. She clears it to free her mind. She doesn't need a grand reason to care for herself. For her, simply showing up for herself is reason enough. No one sees the way she places her hand on her chest when her heart sinks, the way she turns down invitations, even tempting ones, when her body needs rest, the way she walks slowly, not to appear aloof, but because she refuses to be pulled by meaningless urgency. These things are small, but repeated over time, they whisper to her, I am worthy of love not from anyone else, but from myself. There are days she feels exhausted, lost, tempted to give up, but instead of collapsing, she returns to her quiet rituals, the ones that don't require motivation, only loyalty to herself. That's when she realizes self-respect doesn't appear when you're strong. It reveals itself in how you lift yourself when no one else can. She used to think self-worth came from achievements, praise, and recognition. But the more she grew, the more she understood. What makes someone truly admirable is how consistently they treat themselves, especially when no one is watching. A woman who keeps promises to herself, even small ones, like going to bed early, drinking enough water, or not texting, someone who once hurt her is a woman who cannot be easily broken. These small habits won't attract attention, but they build resilience. Because no one becomes confident overnight. No one finds inner peace by accident. These are the results of 100 quiet choices made with sincerity. She doesn't have to say, I am worthy. She simply lives in a way that makes it undeniable. People often confuse self-love with emotional indulgence, but she knows the difference. Loving herself isn't about doing what feels good. It's about doing what's necessary. Not always comfortable, but always honest. She chooses a few minutes of discomfort to stay true to her standards rather than one moment of ease that leads to long regret. She's not chasing perfection, she's chasing honesty with herself. Each ritual she repeats isn't for the sake of accomplishment, but to keep rhythm, the rhythm of her inner world, the rhythm of awareness, the rhythm of a woman who doesn't wait for someone else to show her the way. And in that rhythm, she moves with a calm that doesn't need words. People see her as grounded, composed, strong, but they don't see the foundation behind it, the moment she chose to rise instead of crumble, to walk away instead of beg, to remain silent instead of justify. It all begins with the smallest things. And those smallest things are exactly what define who she is. Not loud, not grand. Just consistent enough to carry her day by day closer to the woman she's becoming.